Next, I just want to talk about Israel.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a big supporter of Israel. Last July, I went to the Christians Unite for Israel Summit in Washington, D.C., and I've also been following a lot of what's been going on in this state, the Jewish state, over the last year and a half, 2 years. And there was news that came out this morning. Now, Israel is a small country. It's about the same size as Northland or the Wairarapa area. Very small country. It's got about 6 million people, so a couple more million than we have. And they're always under constant attack. And there was, just a few weeks ago, terrorists tried to come across the Gaza border into southern Israel, and there was a big ploy there. And then also just this morning, there were 3 more rockets that were fired into the southern Israel area. And fortunately, reports say there is no injuries, but there have been buildings destroyed, and they've been hit by these bombs that have fired in southern Israel. And there is a concern that school goes back next Monday, and these kids are going to be in harm's way. And from following what the Israeli Defence Force do, they're very strategic. And with being a country at attack for such any time really, without knowing, you've got to have the top quality military stuff. So their idea is to stop the attacks as soon as they start happening, and while also creating as less harm and damage as they can. So they have these fantastic ploys where they will target the person and they'll take them out, but these people know that's what they do. So if they're in a vehicle, they'll drive to an area or drive under a house where the IDF doesn't know if there's anyone there, so they have to send the missile off to the side and completely abandon it. Or these terrorists will set their missile launch area up between 2 schools or next to a hospital where they don't know if there's anyone inside the building. So it's quite a scary time if you're living in Israel with all this conflict possibly coming from Iraq and your neighbours not being very friendly to this small area and vocally saying that we want to march them into the sea. I was just wondering what your views was on the state.
Well, aren't we so fortunate to live in a country like New Zealand where we don't have to worry about things like that, about our safety in that same way, about who may be flooding over a border in either direction, and with armed conflict and so on going on in your neighbourhood. It's such a complex problem in Israel and Palestine and countries in that area. And some of the best and most committed minds and politicians in the world have dedicated so many thousands and thousands of hours over such a long period of time to try and make the lives of people in that area better. And it's a challenge that I think that we need to continue with, and that the world needs to continue to embrace, because my limited knowledge of that part of the world is that I wonder whether they have more in common than apart, and that's why the fighting's going on.
Right.
On the 2 sides of the border. Terrorism anywhere is something that I find appalling and atrocious, and certainly New Zealand has played its part to the degree that we can as a small country at the bottom of the world, to support causes where we can eradicate terrorism, where people can go about their lives without the fear of that form of intimidation or threat of violence. But it's a very complex issue, and the world's a complex place. I think for New Zealand we've just got to keep doing our part. Some of that's in the United Nations, some of it's as a result of our bilateral relationships. A lot of it is in cooperation with other countries of the world, like-minded countries who want greater freedom and peace and prosperity and democracy for the world.
But unfortunately, the United Nations itself isn't a great friend of Israel because they're looking at it through a different scope. And being the only democracy in the Middle East, if Israel came out personally asking for help from New Zealand, from whatever we could do, would you put deep thoughts into doing what we could do to help them?
Yeah, I think the first port of call would be to America, one of their closest allies, and they have such a strong and strategic alliance there. In whatever New Zealand needs to, decides to do, we need to be mindful of our ability to influence and provide support. There's many parts of the world where New Zealanders have been involved. We're currently in Afghanistan, and for some very important reasons. The Sinai we've had New Zealanders there previously. In and around Papua New Guinea, we've had New Zealanders on the ground in the Solomon Islands, in East Timor, Timor-Leste. So where we can help and be constructive, we often have.
Yeah.
But I think we also though need to be mindful of the size of our country, what we're able to do and able to achieve, and then to look at others, in a similar circumstance, and the way that we join with them. I take the point though that the United Nations has not been a big friend of Israel, so I'm not sure that they've always or have worked against Israel.
No, they
I think that the United Nations is made up of countries of the world who independently have opinion, and Israel does fairly well as far as the UN is concerned. Having said that, there are a number of views there, of the different countries, and it's been a very important forum for dialogue around this. Now, a number of the things that have happened in Israel have happened with UN sanction. There are other things in the Middle East perhaps that could have happened and haven't because of the UN's involvement. So I think we're going to be a little bit cautious in looking at the role of the UN, not to hope or assume that they can play a bigger role than they have, because again it's a group of countries that come together and try to reach a common ground. And my time in the European Union suggests that when you get enough people around a table, then it's always about compromise, and compromise is not always the very best way forward. But it's an interesting topic and a big challenge, and where New Zealand can play a positive role to make the lives of others better anywhere in the world is something we should consider, bearing in mind the size and amount of influence we might or might not have.
Well, thank you very much for sitting down with me.
It's always a pleasure.